Very well. So good morning. This is welcome. This is Andre Marco, I'm the director of the European Roundtable on Climate Change and Sustainable Transition. And I want to welcome you all to the webinar ETS review in the Fit for 55 package. So if you are in the wrong webinar, I think you should seek an alternative, but this is for the moment. We will wait for a few minutes as people sign in. In principle, there are quite a few people. We shall see what the real numbers are, but it takes time for people to stream in, and I will wait for 1 or 2 more minutes to introduce the speakers, and then we will get started. So this is the one morning that we have our first event. I will get started to start introducing people, but today we have our first event on the Fit for 55 package, and it's focusing on the ETS review. Tomorrow we will follow up with the second part on the Fit for 55 package. These are initial thoughts on the CBAM and the provisions, the proposal on the CBAM. There are connections, strong connections between them, with the CBAM being, a companion, put forward a companion to the ETS. But join us tomorrow for part 2. Now, I have to tell you that we have been doing this for 1.5 years, and we have been doing this successfully on Zoom. We find it simple and effective. It's not a commercial for Zoom. But I can tell you that this morning, none of the systems were working. We finally managed to get them working, but initially nothing was working. So we had an exciting morning. I'd like to welcome the speakers. First of all, I'd like to thank Hans Bergman from European Commission, the head of unit that is responsible for the ETS review. Hans, I think, has been at the end of a few months of stress and a few months of long hours. And I hope that summer will follow in vacation. So Hans, thank you very much for joining us. Emilie Alberola from EcoAct, a French consulting company that is quite active in this area. Emilie has been active in dealing with ETS and climate change for many years. We have known each other in many impersonations over the years. I think, not sure which Emilie or I had been through more hats than I think me, probably. Wanda Buk, who's the vice president at PGE, the Polish power company. Wanda will be joining us shortly. I think people are also running around different capitals dealing with the Fit for 55 package with their boards and senior management colleagues. Pavel Rezabek, who's the chief economist at ČEZ, the Czech power utility. And last but not least, Jakob Hansen, who's the CEO of Fertilizers Europe. Jakob, thank you very much for taking the time. I think it is a closing curtain for many of us during this summer. So we are still, Wanda, welcome. Good to see you. Thank you for joining us. I understand that you have your own other stresses to deal with. But what the thing that we need to say is that we have seen, I have been in the ETS since, I would say, since day one. And I thought I've seen it all. I remember the ETS, the initial ETS package that came with Commissioner Hedegaard at that time, and Joss. So this is many, many years ago. Then we see one review for phase 2, review for phase 3, review for phase 4, MSR discussion. And we thought that we put it to bed. We saw that we had a fit for 2030. And certainly the ETS has come alive. ETS has been for many years kind of not very influential at levels of prices that really were not very influential in triggering change. Now, for the last number of years, especially after the MSR review phase 4, the ETS has now taken a new wind. And for those of you that have been in this bubble or on this planet, prices have skyrocketed from 5 to 55. As some people told me, if I knew anything about this business, I would have been long at 5 and not here at 55 anymore. I would have been doing something else. But obviously, I didn't know enough about the ETS. Nevertheless, in the Fit for 55 package, ETS is an important element. Also, it is combined with what was a mandatory review of the MSR. Again, the MSR, an important component. ERCST has done quite a lot of work on this, done independently with colleagues, including MED, as the state of the ETS report. So now we have been served with the proposal on the ETS review, which includes the MSR, as part of Fit for 55 package. It is, one would say, for all of us, a historical moment. It is a historical moment. I mean, it's sometimes you use this expression and the hyperbole. In this case, I don't believe it to be. I think we are in a historical moment where a lot of things will change. So without further ado, what I would like to do is to now ask Hans Bergman to give us his presentation, his kind of input on what the proposal contains. I think many of you, all of you probably have read it with different levels of granularity. But Hans, you have the floor. After this, the ERCST will provide our view of what we read, and then we'll go to a discussion roundtable with the participants. Hans, you have the floor. You have slides once?
Sorry, hello. Hi, everyone. Well, I didn't, I do have slides, but maybe I can speak to the slides if it's okay, because I don't know, we didn't discuss that before. But I first of all say hello and thanks for organizing this and for inviting me to make a presentation. As you said, most people have read about this proposal. Maybe not so many have read it because it's, you know, legally it's a little bit difficult reading because it's a proposal that changes the existing directive, and that means you know, you have to have the existing one next to you when you read it. Maybe the only part that is a little bit easy to read is what is about this proposed new ETS, which is more text from the beginning to the end. Okay, I will say that I will talk first about the existing ETS, and then I will talk about including the MSR, and then I will talk about the new proposed ETS for building and road transport, also a little bit about maritime and aviation. Is that okay like this? I speak without slides?
Sure. Mm-hmm. We know your hands. I mean, whatever makes you comfortable, it's okay.
So there's some noise in the street, but I hope it will stop. Anyway, so you know, ETS has been now for a long time a key instrument in our climate policy, and it's foreseen to continue like that. And since we are doing strengthening of the overall EU cap from 40 to 55%, and EU ETS was always contributing its fair share to this reduction, a bit more than the other half of the emissions which were in the effort sharing regulation and the LULUCF. So, and of course, so this would continue. So I think this is the less surprising part of the whole proposal. So what we need to do is, on the one hand, change the end target of the ETS for this period until 2030. So we change it from 43% to now we propose minus 61%. There, it's maybe good to clarify that the 43% we have now is without maritime, and the figures you might have seen before of 62 or 63% was also without maritime, but now we will propose to add maritime sector to the existing ETS, and then let's say the effect is that because it's a sector that is expected to reduce emission a little bit less than the others, and also by, say, mathematical almost necessity, when you increase sectors, you modify a little bit the end target. So this new what proposed target of minus 61% is similar. Well, it's basically the same as the one you have seen a year ago for the existing ETS sectors. It's also then to reach this, we need to then modify the linear reduction factor, which we have, and currently 2.2% reduction of the cap per year. So that's proposed to be then 4.2% if we start in 2024. And that's also maybe a general comment that, you know, because we're all talking about trajectory down to 2030, and depending on when we start to modify it, it will also have an impact on the numbers, for example, on this linear reduction factor. The same thing is that, 1 second. As we have now a situation where the cap is every year quite a lot above the annual emissions, we have the MSR that reduces what comes to the market through less auctioning, but and that functions functions well. I could show a slide about that, but in order to align the cap more to the annual emissions, it's proposed a one-off reduction of the cap that is also sometimes called a rebasing. On that, we don't give an exact number in the proposal, but because it also depends on which year you do it. But if one would do it in 2024, it would mean 117 million ton reduction in the cap as we propose it. That is kind of a medium. One could, of course, reduce it much more because the distance between cap and annual emissions is bigger, but we had this proposal to make it a little bit less dramatic. Then, well, I could perhaps already now say that because we propose to add maritime to the sectors, that will also mean ETS becomes a little bit bigger, and that means increasing the cap. So that the cap increase of maritime, if one do it in 2024, would be in the order of 80 million ton. So the net reduction difference between this reduction of the cap, the one-off reduction of the cap, and the adding of maritime is more like 40 million in that order. But it would depend, then change a little bit if it comes later. One other element linked to the existing ETS is the market stability reserve. As you probably know, it reduces the amount of allowances we auction with 24% of the surplus we have in the system. And when this system was adopted, first it was 12% removal intake rate, as we call it, and then it was changed to 24% in order to make it stronger. But that was a time-limited increase to 24%. Now, because this is time limited to include the 2023, we thought that it's an important signal since this shows to work very well, and we think it should continue like that. It is proposed to continue with the 24%, and this is a separate proposal that is Commission hopes will be taken through co-decision quicker than the rest of the whole package, which is of course much more complicated. So there is one separate legal proposal to just continue 24%. Then there is another part of the main proposal. There is one MSR issue, which is notably to mitigate what we call the threshold effect, which will happen that when we are close to the threshold where the MSR will apply, we will have 24% or nothing taken out of from the auctioning, and that could have that would be in the order of, let's say, 200 million allowances or more. And we were a bit worried that when the market thinks that we are close to that date, there can be a lot of speculation. Will it be above or below, and maybe the carbon price will fluctuate unnecessarily due to that. So it's better to have a sort of a smooth system where the intake to the MSR goes down. So when we are close to the upper threshold of 833 million, we might only remove a few million allowances from auctioning, so that will not create this effect. We also propose to add supply and demand from aviation and maritime into the MSR calculations, which was not done before. And one more proposed change is that this big reserve is now full of something in the order of 2 billion allowances, because it's been added there since a long time. But there is an invalidation clause in the rules, and it currently refers to invalidation to everything above the number of allowances auctioned during the previous years. And since this is an amount which can be a little bit random depending on different aspects, proposed that this number should be 400 million. So it also gives more certainty to the market that that's what we keep in the reserve. Then when it comes to free allocation, it is not proposed to change very much, really. It's mainly to make it possible to update the benchmarks a bit faster for the sectors that decarbonize fastest. And then also the possibility to broaden the scope of the benchmarks, so that possibly some of these new, completely new types of products could have, at least for some period, access to free allocation. So, for example, green hydrogen or green steel, hydrogen-based steel, which today would not get any free allocation because the definition of benchmarks is very much focused on fossil fuel use. Another novelty is it's proposed to have a conditionality to part of the free allocation, because all installations that are part of ETS, they are big enough to, according to the Energy Efficiency Directive, be obliged to do energy audit. So the idea is that companies should show that they are doing what is recommended in these audits to the extent they are cost efficient. Otherwise, there will be reduction of free allocation of 25%. Then there will be also, the carbon border adjustment mechanism that you proposed, discussed a lot in your meetings, Andre. And so, as you have seen, it's supposed to be a kind of a starting period for a couple of years, but then from 26, the free allocation to the products concerned would reduce 10 percentage points per year, or 10% per year, and then when the CBAM is then phased in. So there will be phase in, phase out with the CBAM. And otherwise, the CBAM proposal is separate. It's not really what I will discuss about, but there is a link to the ETS price there, as you might have seen. So we, in part of the deal to improve help the innovation fund will be increased from 450 to 650 million allowances. That is sort of proposed in real numbers. And then it's also proposed that the free allocation reduced because of the carbon border adjustment mechanism, those free allowances will also go to the innovation fund. Then we have this new proposal. Sorry, I need to drink a bit again. Since emissions from buildings and road transport has shown not to reduce much or even increase, and the challenge is seen there, it's been deemed that in addition to the many policy measures that exist, also to propose to include start with the emissions trading for building and road transport. And this system would be separate. It's part of the same directive, but it's a separate system, and it's proposed to start in 2026. It's supposed to start in a soft way, I can say it, by cap being relatively generous based on the existing effort sharing regulation data, and then in 2028 adjustment to new data. So there would the to meet the 2030 target, but to get there in a sort of smooth way. The aim is also to avoid a too high carbon price. And other ways where this high to, not too high, whatever, but at least to have a modest carbon price is to have a front loading of auction volumes, so 30% higher auction volumes in the first year than the amount normally auctioned. There will also be a market stability reserve that, as in the other system, and which will be already loaded with 600 million allowances and thresholds between 210 and 440 million. But at least make sure that this reserve is fully functional from the first day if the surplus would go down below the lower limit. There are also price-based clauses where the Commission is asked to increase auction in case the price doubles or triples. So this is all linked to the price setting. Then anyway, because there's a lot of concern about the social aspects and both vulnerable households and rural areas, etc. So 25% of the revenues of the fund of this new ETS would go to the Social Climate Fund, which should support vulnerable groups with investments in energy efficiency, buildings, in mobility, etc. But can also provide temporary support to vulnerable households. Member states are supposed to also contribute half of the money to this fund, which is mentioned around 72 billion euro in the proposal. And this money could come from also from this new ETS. There is so that's about that. And then there is the proposal to add the maritime, as I said, to the existing ETS. As you may know, we already have an MRV system, so monitoring, reporting, verification of shipping companies coming to EU ports. So there is quite a good overview of the emissions generated by the ships. So it's proposed to cover all intra-EU trips plus half of the incoming and half of outgoing trips or voyages, as they sometimes say. And when it comes to aviation, I think the main issue, without going into too much details, is that it's proposed to phase out the free allocation to aviation because we know they have a difficult time, but nevertheless there is no competition. Well, there's equal competition because all the trips that are covered by ETS are covered by all airlines that make those trips. So there is no in principle carbon leakage issue there. That's why there is proposed to take away gradually the free allocation. So I think that's the sort of an overview. Of course, all this is accompanied by strengthening policy actions in, say, more in the other normal areas, as you know, the energy efficiency, renewable energy, the strengthening rules for new cars being sold, and the energy tax directive, which will also mostly deal with more the many exemptions that exist, and also the carbon border adjustment mechanism, and also some strengthening of the land use issues. So that's my introduction. I think I kept my time.
No, I think, thank you, Hans, very much. I think the one thing that we're having difficulty, we should have, it is a bizarre boarding because we're having some difficulty signing in Pavel Rezabek. But thank you very much, Hans, for your intervention. The way we'd like to do this, we'll get our intervention and then the intervention of the panelists. And then what I will ask is, I see that there are some Q&As, questions on Q&A, but our strong preference is to have people raise their hand, and I will promote them to panelists in such a way that they can make their intervention live. I mean, this is at best as we can do a surrogate to a normal life. So we prefer at least that we see a live person on the screen rather than hands being than questioned by internet. So Stefano, do you want to move on to your intervention, and then we can get the reactions from Emilia and Wanda and Jacob and hopefully Pavel.
So thank you, Andre, and thank you, Hans, for your presentation. And so this is meant to be like really a very brief summary of what are our preliminary takeaways on this Commission proposal. So first, I think it's worth stressing, as Hans has already said, that this proposal puts even more the ETS at the very core of the efforts of the EU efforts to abate emissions. And so the expectation of those who wanted a business proposal to rebalance that for sharing between ETS and non-ETS sectors has been a bit disappointed. And we see that the ETS sector are now expected to contribute even more to the abatement effort of the EU, around, we calculated 56.5% versus 54% under the climate and energy framework, that is the present point of reference. Also, we know that a 4.2 linear reduction factor is a significant step forward in ambition. It was, of course, needed coincidentally with the net zero target for 2050 and with a midterm target for 2030. But we know, as Hans has said, that this implies, I mean, a consistent reduction of emission, and so about 82 million CO2 tons of CO2 every year. And if the one-off reduction, the rebase will happen in 2024, it will consist of around 17 million allowances. If it will happen later, it will be even more consistent. And also, we noticed that a 4.2% LRF, it seems to lead to a net zero emissions in ETS sectors by around 2040. So it will be also interesting to understand why this so, and so how it will relate with the other components of the EU climate policy. There is also another element to take into account, is that our other sectors, especially transport, but also the building sector, will electrify, and so will create additional demand for electricity. How this will impact old, or let's say traditional ETS sectors, we expect it to add extra demand, and so extra pressure, extra stress on these sectors. And but we have also to consider that there were different, let's say, needs that the Commission had to factor in when making this proposal. And so we think that the fear of strong social impacts, as Hans has already mentioned, is behind many of the Commission's choices. So we have to take this into account, of course. One question that we would like to raise, and to also invite our speakers to discuss on, is whether or not the old ETS and new ETS are expected to converge at some point, when and under which conditions. That will be interesting to understand. In past papers, also ERCST analyzed what an impact of the 24% intake rate for the MSR coupled with a high LRF would be. And we saw that this could be associated and correlated with a irregular price pathway from here to 2030. But as Hans has said, this new buffer intake of the MSR, of course, mitigates that risk. But we would like to know from our speaker if they think this is enough, or they would have expected something stronger, or a lower MSR or lower MSR intake. Then the second issue, of course, is industrial competitiveness. We know that the European Green Deal is not just a climate strategy, but it's also a strategy to relaunch the European industry and to put it at the forefront of global competition, especially of the green economy. But in the medium term, we notice that CBAM just partially replaced what free allocation has done for industry in the past decade. There are no, for example, export rebates in the CBAM proposals, and so this will, of course, in the medium term at least, will make it harder for you businesses to compete at the international level. And also a question that we would like to raise is what will happen with the free allowances that are no longer allocated to CBAM sectors during the phase out? So the annual 10% that will be phased out. So it will go to national auctions, so it will be auctioned, or it will go to the free allocation pool for other sectors that are not covered by CBAM. Part of them will go to the Innovation Fund. So we would like to discuss it a bit today. Also, we have already mentioned like the electrification process. Electrification is described, and of course it is a great opportunity for many sectors, also for industry to electrify and to phase out fossil fuels in many operations. But if there is still until the world, let's say, electricity production in Europe will become green, so will become zero emission, then there will be still a carbon cost that is associated with electricity. So this will be an additional burden for industry during the electrification process and during the decarbonization process. Another point that we noticed that many of the breakthrough technology of the clean technologies that can decarbonize industry will be hardly marketable until 2030. And so what we do in this period? That's a question. And another point is that in light of this, the abatement of the industry, the abatement path of industry could look more like a curve, rather than as a line. But of course, we have a linear reduction factor. So then we have also to take it into account and to see how industry can cope with that. Of course, the LRF, so the level of ambition of the ETS, and the year when the ETS is supposed to go to zero, affects also the choices of technologies that industry has to make. And so, is there room under this framework, under this setup for interim steps, and so for low carbon solutions that are not directly, that don't directly go to zero, but still allowed to significantly reduce emissions in the industry sector? That's another question. Another big theme of the European Green Deal and of the ETS review is how to finance all of these, how to finance these new technologies. Green finance is at the top of the political agenda, not just at the EU level, but also at the international level. But of course, this green finance cannot be provided just by the ETS. Of course, the ETS can raise very important revenues that will go to the funds. But of course, the funding question, let's say, cannot be answered only by the ETS, especially because carbon prices, even if very high, do not ensure in many cases the bankability of these new technologies. So we need more support in this regard. And if we compare this situation that many industrial technologies face now to the one that renewable power faced like years ago, we see that it took a very long time for renewable energy to become competitive, and this came at the price of much political and financial support. So now we see that the industry needs to do the same very quickly, and maybe with less resources, because resources have to be spread out across many sectors. And also looking a bit at the whole package, so the whole Green Deal, we see that there is a lot of money, of course, that have been spent in green technology to finance this transition, also to mitigate the social aspects. We see already that at the international level, the demand for raw materials that will be useful for the transition is increasing, and this is putting pressure on prices. And so these, combined with higher carbon prices, that of course will increase the prices of many goods, of many processes, this could give birth to an inflation spiral. And so this is also something that I think policymakers should take into account and should look very carefully, also because on the other side of the Atlantic, we see the first signs of this post-COVID inflation. Then finally, we have also to give Commission credit for the fact that, of course, the Commission has a strong mandate on climate, but industrial policies are still largely controlled in the hands of member states. And so a lot of this financing, a lot of this let's say, strategy for making new breakthrough technologies available for industry have to emerge at the national rather than at the EU level. Of course, there are some new rules, for example, state aid rules that have been are in the process of being changed, and this could help, of course, member state task of finances green technologies, making their industries competitive in the transition. We also think that this is a very complex package. The ETS review comes within together with many other policies, so it's a very complicated puzzle with many pieces. And so we need also to assess what is the resilience of the overall setup, especially if something doesn't go as was planned by the Commission, by policymakers, by the predictions of economists. And so what if this happen? Does this setup holds or not? And so the final thought is like a provocation. So of course we have the 2050 objective, net zero objective in mind. That is our goal. That has been agreed at the EU level, at the international level. So if not this proposal, what is the alternative? That would be interesting to be listened by our speakers if somebody has a different setup in mind and a different alternative in mind. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward for the discussion.
Very well, thank you very much, Stefano. And I think we're a little bit ahead times. I think that Pavel Rezabek had joined us. I think you're on the phone. The best he could do is kind of get through on the phone, but at least we're happy to have him. Pavel, can you hear us? I hope he can hear us. Anyway, we'll start our intervention now from the discussion with Emilie Alberola, Wanda, and then Pavel and Jakob Hansen. So first, Emilie, I see a couple of hands up, so we take note of the hands up or urge others to raise their hand. They will give them the floor after the initial intervention of the panel. So Emilie, you go first.
Okay, thank you, Andre. Good morning, everyone. Many thanks, Andre, Stefano, for your invitation and for your presentation, and also Stefano for your introduction on the key points of this proposal. So I'm very pleased to join your event to share some, I would say, preliminary thought just 4 days after the release of this huge legislative package, and especially this proposal with some more than 500 pages to read and to dissect the text to understand well all the content and the impact implication of this proposal. I would like to share with you 4 main comments. First one on the role of the ETS. I would like to come back on this, I would say, key question. The issue of the stability and predictability. I would like also to share some words about the resilience of the ETS. And the last one for me, I would like to comment, it's the issue, the question of the net zero transition. So first on the role of the ETS, as we know all, since 2005, the European Commission has always presented the ETS as a cornerstone of its climate policy. However, it has been demonstrated that the main part of emission reduction during 2005, 2016, 17, the main part of emission reduction came from complementary policies, and at the end, the carbon price played a minor role. It's not the case now, and since 2018, we have seen a demonstration of first impact of the carbon price on the decarbonization. But today we understand that the ETS is always a cornerstone of the decarbonization towards now the ambition, the objectives of the climate neutrality. The ETS, as you mentioned, Stefano, is at the core of the ambition of the abatement efforts. So on the ambition and the objective, this review of the ETS is supposed to answer to a multiple of objective, policy objective, economic, technology, and also social objectives. We can read in the proposal that the objective, the ETS needs to be reviewed to be aligned to the 55% target. The UTS needs to be reviewed to accelerate decarbonization in industry, to align with the cost share for aviation, to boost the GHG emission in sectors not covered by a carbon price, but with very low reduction in the last decade, such as maritime, transport, and building, to support and fund low carbon technology, but also to address distributional and social concerns. So at the end, there are too much objective for, I would say, only one instrument. And probably we need to recognize that we need additional measure or complementary measure of this UTS to make sure that we address all the issue. On the abatement mandate, first, Stefano, you mentioned exactly what is expected now from the UTS. The main part of abatement will come from the ETS sector. In this proposal. And furthermore, we understand also in the proposal at the end that the UTS will be linked with a large number of other measures implemented in its sectors at the international level first, with the CORSIA, with the ICAO, the International Civilization Organization, with the IMO for the maritime. At the European level also, the UTS is linked with a large number of energy and climate policy, but also with some sustainable finance policies such as a taxonomy that will use the benchmark for industrial sector, but also linked with national policies, as you mentioned, Stefano, especially for the industry. The main part of industrial policy are at the end of the member states. In this issue with the coordination between member states and the European level, we can understand also that the UTS will be implemented in the industry and in transport and building sectors to accelerate reduction emission in those effort sharing reduction regulation sectors that were previously regulated by national policy. So at the end, from my point of view, we need to have a better view of the role expected for this UTS. Will the UTS play the driver or the safety net in those sectors to support national policy? This is a key issue that we need to clarify on the exact role of this UTS. The objective is no longer to choose between the UTS and other policy to decarbonize. We need both, but at the end, we must no longer fall into the trap also expecting everything from the UTS. We have some interesting example, for instance, the experience of California, where the ETS role as a safety net is accepted. So probably in Europe, we could recognize the role of the UTS with a portfolio of complementary policy to have I would say, a basket approach rather than only one instrument to do all the job. The second comment is on stability and predictability. On stability first, the European Commission has worked for, I would say, almost 1 decade to restore, to balance this UTS with a number of proposals that we know, with the market stability, the backloading, the review of the directive. And since 2018, we can see that this market provides some signal of destabilization with the increase of the price in line with the ambition, and this market delivered the first signs of decarbonization. So it was important that the European Commission preserve this stability for the UTS to continue to operate on these assets for those sectors, industry and power sector. So I think that the decision to launch an adjacent ETS for transport and building sectors goes in this direction, even if the choice, of course, for launching this additional ETS is also mainly for economic reasons. Stability and predictability. So predictability, as you know, is key for industrial and energy companies. It's key to anticipate and to translate the regulatory framework into investment decision. And on this point, I would say that the proposal improves largely this predictability of the ambition, and we understand that the ambition will increase over the next decade. We know the key figures of the target. The review of the market stability reserve parameters has specify the free allocation also. We understand that on the free allocation would be over maximum in 2036. So we have the key figures on the ambition, on the extension of the scope, on the introduction of the CBAM, also this gradual introduction. So on those two, even if we have, of course, some uncertainty, yeah, but on those two issues of stability and predictability, I would say that the European Commission proposal is welcome and provide interesting elements for our economic sectors to anticipate and prepare the transition. My third point would be related with the resilience, technical resilience of the ETS, with the improvement of this market stability reserve to adjust the ETS in the event of external shocks. So this proposal of the review of the market stability reserve is welcome, with all the figures mentioned by Hans. But in addition, also, I see that we need to have also a better policy resilience of the ETS, and we can add also social aspect to make sure that the transition will be sustainable. On the policy resilience, we need some diplomatic action from the European Commission to manage some international reaction that could have some impact on those proposals from the China, the India, the Turkey that can react on the CBAMs, on the introduction of the maritime. And we have an experience in Europe, of course, with, as you know and remember, with the inclusion of the aviation in 2012, with the withdrawal of the international flight after Chinese and US-American trade repression. So on that, probably we need to reinforce the diplomatic action from the European to make sure that our proposal can be resilient. The last maybe elements is on net zero transition. We have a better view and understanding about the targets. We understand that emission reduction from the power sector will be around 60%. We will have a high contribution from industry with around 30% of reduction expected in those industrial sectors. We know the low carbon technology roadmap that we need to implement by 2050, and the report from the International Energy Agency, for instance, published in May, provide us very clear elements on that. And what we understand from the European Commission proposal is that, especially in the industry side, achieving this reduction target will be possible if each sector implements the most efficient technology in conventional technology to achieve the benchmark in each sectors. But we already know that the conventional technology will not be sufficient. We will need breakthrough technology that have very high cost. And in this context, of course, we need to have some additional measures to support the industrial sector decarbonization, such as steel, chemical, and cements, and others. So the main question is to know whether the Commission proposal will be enough to provide the right incentive. And if not, what would be the additional measure to make sure that we will invest in these breakthrough technologies to achieve a long-term target. In this context, I would say that the increase of the size of the Innovation Fund is welcome, and again, and also the proposal on the carbon contract for difference can be also an interesting instrument. Last things from my point of view related with the net zero transition is to highlight the fact that this net zero transition is not just emission reduction. This transition should not be just a race to reduce emission and to achieve zero. I would say that all emission reduction are not equal. Some reduction have greater added value for our economy, for our society. So it's important to work also on the transition that has value for all and over time. And in this point, I cover also, of course, all the social aspect with the just transition, but also the issue of the competition. There is now a net zero competition, this emerging between the China, South Korea, US, and Europe, and especially on low carbon technologies, on raw materials. So from my point of view, it would make no sense if Europe was the first region to be net zero in the world without mastering certain technology and with an increasing dependence on other natural resources or materials that will be imported from China and other regions to ensure this transition. Last word maybe on topics that were not included in the proposal and that can be interesting to discuss is the issue of the flexibility. No elements on the link with international, since especially with the Article 6 mechanism from the Paris Agreement for international cooperation. And the link with negative emission also, the link with other sectors and technologies. So negative emission with technology-based or nature-based solution. That's all to launch the debate. Thanks.
Thank you, Emily. Vanda, let's move on right away without further ado. Vanda Bach, PGE. Welcome, Vanda.
Yes, can you hear me? Everything
yes,
fine?
We can hear. Yep.
Okay. So first of all, thank you very much for having me on behalf of PGE, of course. As I said many times, PGE is committed to increase share of renewables and renewables in our portfolio to 50%, and we are going to cover 85% with zero and low emission source by 2030. So we did welcome Fit for 55 package, but nevertheless, it has raised some questions and some concern of ours. So when it comes to our general remarks on the EU ETS reform, first of all, well, I have to say that we are supporting the idea of using all national carbon revenues to finance investments, which are in line with EU ETS directive as the right development to mobilize all member states to use ETS to mitigate the cost of the implementation of new climate target. However, we are concerned about the fact that more consideration hasn't been given to reduce the volatility of carbon prices and limit the volumes of EU ETS allowances, which are traded not to surrender actual emissions, but to make economic profits. And lack of specific safeguards leaves EU ETS open for possible speculations and will be in fact, the main driver for rising carbon prices, disregarding the fact that today's prices are already above what is needed to fuel switch. It's not debatable. So, vital question is, why does the Commission disregard market speculations in the face of carbon prices constantly exceeding 50 euros per ton? And secondly, it's the linear reduction factor that should be responsible for bringing down the overall cap. We are concerned about the Commission's proposal to combine the increased linear reduction factor of 4.2% with an additional one-off cap reduction. As for the one-off cap reduction of 119 million of allowances, it means that from 1 year to another, there will be a sudden drop in auction volumes in situation when no meaningful safeguards from price surge are in place. So why do we need such a high LRF and a one-off reduction, which may cause additional price shock to the carbon market? And this is another question. And moving to the MSR, its newly its newly proposed design parameters will reduce the number of allowances available more quickly. And if we already have an increased LRF, why do we still need to strengthen the MSR to achieve the same objective? This is another question, because we think that LRF alone is enough to drive down the emissions to the required reduction level. This is general remark about the EU ETS. But the second, very vital for Poland, is the Modernization Fund, which and I think I'm speaking not only on behalf of Poland but other low-income member states. You know, the cost of the achievement of new climate targets for Polish households will be enormous, and this is because to achieve those targets we need to invest in all sectors of economy, and someone has to pay for it. We can only alleviate this extra cost for households through an appropriate increase of Modernization Fund. That's why we need to ask, if the proposed increase of the Modernization Fund sufficient, and what will happen, this is even more important, what will happen after 2030 when there will be less allowances. So, you know, in the light of all mechanisms that I mentioned, designed to drastically reduce the number of allowances in the circulation, the increase of Modernization Fund seems highly inadequate, especially given the large extension of what potential beneficiaries coming from the new sector subject to the EU ETS. You know, I also said that during our previous table that Poland having less allowances than the needs should be able to contribute to MSR proportionally less and use a part of volumes dedicated to the MSR to finance its own transition instead of financing the budget of other member states, because this is what's happening now. Also, what I wanted to mention that by removing possibility to finance gas investments, the Commission shows that it has no recognition for different starting points. Investment in natural gas-fired high-efficient cogeneration plants remain the only solution to progressively withdraw coal-fueled units in district heating system, improve air quality, and prevent deepening the energy poverty. But you know, that's probably hasn't been recognized by the Commission. Our question is why the European Commission haven't seen that we are in different moment when it comes to the transition. It confirms that. I mean, removing possibility to finance gas. Well, what I would like to underline that in coal-dependent countries undergoing a green transition, like such as Poland, ensuring just transition in ETS requires a higher Modernization Fund that enables moving away from coal in a reliable and predictable way, in line with technology neutral principle. And so, to sum up, because I don't want to consume more time right now, and I will wait for question later on. As I said, the package raised our concerns. There are still so many of them to be addressed. There are so many questions to be answered, and we just hope that the Commission and the Commission will not sneak through them in the legislative process. So basically, yeah, that's for now.
Thank you, Wanda. Pavel, can you hear us now? I think you can.
Yes. Can you hear me as well?
Yes, we can. Thanks for the heroics of managing to get on finally. Go ahead, please.
Okay. First, let me apologize. We have somewhat stricter rules from our IT, so we generally have some difficulties to join Zoom meetings now. So sorry for it. Well, as for the comments, we believe that this new EU ETS proposal creates some reasonable level playing field for the next decade. And I would like to comment 3 or 4 specific issues. The first one is this introduction of the second EU ETS, or the parallel EU ETS for transport and building sectors. Actually, it is absolutely reasonable to include this. We can observe, we have an experience that, for example, a central heating plant faces serious difficulties and actually an unfair competition from local boilers in households, simply because for central heating plant, you have to pay CO2 allowance, whereas for a boiler in my household, we simply do not pay anything. So it creates some difficulties because people tend to disconnect from the central heating system simply because of this price. It is not because of higher efficiency of domestic boilers. The more that a significant part of these central heating plants are cogeneration units producing electricity and using the waste heat for heating. So it will create a fair play for the situation. From the purely economic view, it is somehow strange to have 2 prices for the same CO2 molecule. It would be, we believe, somewhat better to have just one system, or to have at least a clear convergence plans for these 2 systems. And actually, for the time being, it seems they tend to diverge from the very beginning. For example, when we read what will happen when the prices will be somehow excessive. So for the traditional EU ETS, in Article 29A, we read that something will happen if for more than 6 consecutive months, the allowance is more than 3 times the average price of the 2 preceding years. But for the new EU ETS, it is 3 consecutive months instead of 6. The average price is more than twice the average instead of 3 times, and it is during the 6 preceding consecutive months, not 2 years. So it would be somehow better to have the same rules for both EU ETS systems, just to make the convergence easier. One more comment. I wanted to talk widely about Modernization Fund, and Wanda did it already. Thank you for it. So maybe just one additional comment. What we see is that the Modernization Fund should not be used for any fossil fuels, including gas, we understand. And it seems to be quite strict, because for the time being, the overall energy consumption can be split between energy, electricity, it's like 1/4, transportation, it is 1/4, and heat is about half. So for the time being, for example, in our country, we have a lot heat from coal, and we understand it produces a lot of CO2, and sooner or later it will stop. And the original way was just to switch to gas some a relatively easy, not inexpensive, but possible switch with 1/3 of emissions. And somehow it seems it would not be possible, and it opens a question: how should we solve the heating system? Because the heating season is at least for 7 months. In this region, it consumes a significant volume of energy. As for CO2 price formation, in theory, this should correspond to switching from gas to coal. It is, because of whatever reason, somewhat higher today, and in future it will definitely switch, because the savings should not come only from the power sector, but some industrial savings will be inevitable. And the question is how the abatement curve for different industrial sectors look like. Actually, there are not many reliable sources to make a clear picture. So maybe, Andre, it can be a question to you, or maybe Joint Research Center could provide some trustworthy outlook. And the last comment is market stability reserve. We were actually a bit surprised that the MSR threshold 400 and 833 have not changed. Actually, some significant decarbonization is expected in the energy sector. It has happened already. It will happen even more in the future. So it means that the hedging volumes in this sector will decrease. So it would make somehow sense to decrease also these thresholds. So it's all from my side. Thank you.
Thanks, Pavel. And let's go to Jakob Hansen, then we can go into a discussion. Quite a few people who are asking the floor. Jakob?
Yes, well, thank you very much, Andre, and thank you for inviting me here. And I just want also to congratulate you and the Roundtable for taking the lead in many of these discussions here over the past year. So I think you have contributed a lot to the discussions. I would like to take an industry perspective because I think my other colleagues here, they have given a more general perspective, and so I'll focus on industry. And since I'm from the fertilizer sector, I will use my own sector as an example. So the ETS for me is a known system. I mean, it's a double system where you have a carbon price to give an incentive to reduce emissions, and at the same time you have a system with free allowances, at least for us in the very energy intensive sectors, to maintain our competitiveness. And I think the system has worked. At least in our sector, we've done away with N2O emissions. Admittedly, it was a relatively low-hanging fruit, and we struggle more to do something about ammonia. So I will come back to that. But it's just to say, I think one of the advantages of the ETS is that it's a known system, and it has delivered some results. And I also want to say to Hans Bergman and his colleagues in DG Klima, that one of the things I very much respect is that they do look a long time to get the right figures. And I think that's very important also for the credibility of the system, that the correct figures are used. So 3 issues from my side, maybe 4. One is the benchmarks. The other one is electrification of industrial processes. The next one, and I need to talk about it because I haven't heard much about it, competitiveness. I mean, we're talking here about the future of European industry, and not many actually mentions the word competitiveness. And the last one is I want to paint a future picture on how we in our industry is going to go ahead with producing green ammonia, which is an emission-free ammonia. So first about the benchmarks. The key benchmark in my sector is the Ammonia Benchmark, and here we have a clear limitation because we use gas as a raw material, which means the benchmark can never go to 0, no matter how good we are, because 2/3 of what we do is raw materials for our process, and it just gives a very clear limit to how far you can go. So with any reduction in benchmarks, you know, it becomes very punishing, because you cannot even make yourself more efficient and then escape these payments. You have to do it because so much of it is raw material. So it's 2/3. And this also, for me, means that it's a very key thing that ammonia benchmark continues to be on this low 0.2 reduction coefficient. And I have read the proposal on benchmarks and ETS, and for me, there are some vague threats of a complete radical change of the way to calculate the benchmarks. And I do think for us, clearly it is threatening the confidence in the system going forward. And I really think the Commission should avoid creating this kind of insecurity. Second element is electrification, because I think we know, even though my industry is at the moment gas-based, we know in the future it will be electricity. And I think I have to come back to the issue about state aid for indirect costs and electricity. I don't understand why, when we do this kind of reform, we don't make a clear EU-level regulation on how to deal with indirect costs. It's still state aid, it still depends on national countries. And you know, in our companies, you could run compressors either on steam or on electricity. And we know the future is electricity. But since through a very non-transparent process, the Commission threw fertilizers out of the option of state aid, this gradual transition won't happen. And I just feel that this is lack of courage in maybe in DG Klima to tackle DG Competition and to say, listen, guys, we need to have EU rules on indirect costs. Third element is competitiveness. I talked about ammonia before, and in ammonia, we are 20% short on free allowances. And this is not just me saying that, that's also DG Klima with their latest figures on this. And ammonia is a global product. And if there were no free allowances, the carbon cost would be about 50% of the global price. This is non-competitive. So what are the Commission, what are the institutions thinking about our competitiveness going a little bit forward? Because the CBAM, of course, has been mentioned here, and I want to also mention it. And it's okay, they can deal with imports, sort of anyway, because importers will only pay for the little share of their total production that they import into the EU. But EU producers would have to pay for everything that they produce. So we have a serious problem of being competitive on export markets. So I think, and I honestly think, EU industry needs to be competitive. And I don't think we can just close down and say, let's just look at ourselves, close out the world by CBAM, without saying we also want to play a part in the future world market. Because if we just leave it to the rest of the world, that is definitely not a climate-friendly solution. So the last point I want to talk about is ammonia itself as a product, because in many ways, ammonia is a more condensed form of hydrogen than hydrogen itself. It's easier to transport and handle. So, you know, ammonia will become the workhorse of the hydrogen economy. And we will also slowly make a transition towards green ammonia. But it's going to be a blended transition. It's going to be step by step, and it's going to be small step by small step. And that's just down to the pure scale of things. If you have a 100 megawatt electrolyzer, it can produce 10% of what you need of hydrogen in one ammonia plant, 10%. So the need for electrolyzers, the need for green electricity, and not just somewhere, but at the factory, is absolutely huge. And that's why we will have to do it step by step, a blended transition, as I call it. And I also need to point out that on top of this, it has to be step by step. It is not competitive. Clearly not, because if you want to get hydrogen from splitting water, it costs you 50% more energy than if you get hydrogen from splitting natural gas. So it is a very difficult transition, and we talked about the different funds, and I just need to say that we need clear support for industry transition, not just CapEx, also OpEx, and maybe contract for difference can make a difference, sorry for the pun, but I really think we need to think about how to help industry much more concretely in this transition process. And that's also why, for me, there's no doubt that we need to continue with free allowances, also in CBAM sectors. Also, for us, that would be part of the CBAM sectors. This reduction down to zero doesn't help us at all in this transition, and I think it's a big mistake from the Commission. So I'm looking here at Emily on the screen, and I was reminded you said at some point that the Commission will have to face some diplomatic reactions to their proposals. Maybe they do. I don't care so much. I hope the Commission will have to face some industrial reactions to their proposal, and also help to clarify that it is not just sitting at the drawing board and making, let's go here with the MSR and go like this and this. I think the basic point is also, how does this work for industry? And there I see many shortcomings. So I will leave it here, Andre, but I do think it's important to get the industrial perspective on this, because we are the ones having to live it. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, look, it's quite interesting listening to different points of view, and I know Emily that as a very thoughtful person over the years, so she was playing the role of the kind of the person who's not a pony in the race, if you want to put it that way, in colloquial Canadian English. But then you have the electricians, and then you have the industrials. So I think that there will be different point of views. I didn't think in my lifetime as a former electrician that I would see electrification kind of jump back to before I started the electrification, the growth in electricity was 6-7% a year. And when I was working in the electricity industry, it was a dream. We were talking about the old guys who used to have this great time having 6-7% growth. Well, lo and behold, we're puis ça change. So we are back into that. Look, I gave the floor to Rose. Rose, are you there? I'm not. Rose,
I am here.
Yeah,
Yes.
Rose, do you want to introduce yourself very briefly? It's been a while. I haven't seen you for a long time, but I'm glad to see you back. So if you want to introduce yourself very quickly, let's start the conversation.
Sure. Thank you, Andre. Hello to everyone. Rose Delannoy. I'm working within ENGIE on the renewable hydrogen development project, and I've been following the ETS since its inception. I'm very interested to understand how this review will treat renewable hydrogen and e-fuels. So I've got two questions, slightly technical and detailed. I understand, but I don't have the details, that renewable hydrogen will now be allocated allowances. And I understand it is based on the benchmark for gray hydrogen. My question is there a limit in time for this kind of allocation? And when I say limit in time, I'm thinking of a particular allocation period. And my second question is, when you produce e-fuel based on renewable hydrogen and incorporating either CO2 from the atmosphere or CO2 that is captured from an industry that is itself faced with the ETS, my feeling is that this e-fuel is either neutral as biomass, because the CO2 comes from the atmosphere, or should also be considered neutral if the CO2 has already been impacted by the ETS. So when you burn the e-fuel, it should be considered as not emitting CO2. Otherwise, you would have twice an impact of the ETS on the same CO2. And I was wondering if anyone has seen some elements that would support that objective. Thank you.
Thanks, Rose. Jimmy, I also promoted I can't pronounce the last name because I'm not quite sure how you pronounce it, and I don't want to massacre. Are you there?
Yeah, hello, I'm there. The name is Jimmy Dugai from Forefront Advisors. And I have two questions. The first one being when maritime and aviation allowances are added to the existing market, is there a risk that a sudden oversupply of permits could crash the carbon price? Because I understand that the Commission is thinking about correcting the supply levels through rebasing, but obviously this would not prevent a short-term collapse. And then the second question, which is somewhat related, is because I heard Stefano say that the ETS is supposed to reach net zero by 2040. So is the expectation that aviation is fully decarbonized by then? Because I think most experts would agree that this is not realistic. Thanks.
Thank you. So anyone, I want to stop now for a second and give the chance to people to react maybe to each other's intervention. Also, Hans, whenever you're available and want to comment, by all means. And I don't want to make this a bilateral with the Commission. That tends to be the case most of the time, whether you like it or not. That we are a very popular person right now, or at least popular in terms of questions. So anyone wants to react to any of the things that were said until now? I think Jacob kind of reacted a little bit to something I think that Emily mentioned. Stefano, anything from your side, or Pavel, anything from your side? They talk about carbon prices and crashing and so on. Does anyone want to react to this? I think that for the moment I see silence. Then if there is silence, then I will go to Magnus Nielsen. So Magnus, I gave you the floor if you want to continue the conversation. Hi,
Yes,
Magnus.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Hi.
we can hear.
I'm an independent climate policy analyst in Sweden. First, I'd like to congratulate the Commission for an impressive work, though I fear there is quite a lot of work still to do. I have a couple of questions on some details. One is about there are proposals on how to solve the friction between the ETS and the CORSIA system. And my question is, does ICAO accept the solution proposed in this from the Commission? EU is not formally a member of ICAO and cannot vote on this. Is this anchored in ICAO and will it survive? My second question is there really a need for the MSR after the mega cancellation that comes 2023? The surplus issue is basically solved, isn't it? And with a high LRF, there will not be a surplus of allowances. I don't think anyone believes that. And the MSR complicates the whole system. In September, when we will probably be in the start of a post-COVID boom, the issuance of allowances will, or the intake of allowances will grow. So it increases the volatility in the prices more than stabilize it, in my view. So is MSR really needed post 2023 or 2024? Thank you.
Yeah, we in RCST, some of the analysis we did was also at 24% with a high LRF. We also saw some instability in price. I think immediately we had that in the state of the ETS report. I think we referred to some of it. Anyone wants to react to any of these? Stefano, do you want to react to some?
Yeah, maybe on aviation, on the question about whether to put aviation under ETS and how it could cause like an oversupply. Honestly, I mean, I don't see this risk also because aviation demand, like aviation emissions are slated to increase, and so demand will also increase as aviation is incorporated. So I don't see this risk of oversupplying the market, honestly. And also, I mean, aviation is a considerable part of emission. I think slightly less than 4% of CO2 emission in the EU, but still, I don't see the risk of trading oversupply in the market. And for the net zero by 2040, that is just let's say a calculation exercise. So we saw at the current level of cap reduction how long it would take to get to net zero. So of course, and that is a net zero. So we don't have to assume that all emissions will be zero, of course, in the ETS sectors by 2040, also because there are process emissions and so on, and there will be sectors where it will be very hard to have net zero emissions by 2040. That is just the calculation of how we would take at this pace for the cap to get to zero.
Emily, did you want to react? I'm not sure whether you were.
Yes, but I have the same question, no specific answer to your question, Manus. The link with ICAO, how the ICAO will accept the European proposal. I have no specific information. It's sure it's diplomatic negotiation. What I know is that there are a fluid a dialogue, an active dialogue between the European Commission and the ICAO. So I hope it will be enough to facilitate the adoption of the European proposal. On that, I agree with you on your comment on the market stability reserve, and this is something that we identify, as you mentioned, Andre, in the state of the ETS report, with the market stability reserve and the LRF that will increase the volatility and the increase of the price. That's all. But at the end, just 4 days after the publication, the disclosure of this very impressive work from the Commission, a lot of question remains. So happy also to have the different point of view of different people, and question at the end are one information.
Vanda, any reaction from your side?
If I may, just to add about the MSR, because also, Emily, you said a lot of predictability and stability of the market, and how that you have to, that the European Commission has to ensure those two. And you know, it reminds me one other comment that I forget to make during my intervention, that we shouldn't forget that this one of reduction of allowances is also acting ex post. So how can investor be sure that this kind of intervention won't be happen in the future? Where is this predictability and stability, you know, when it comes to this, if European Commission create and accept the solutions that are retroactive. This is a huge concern for investors, and I wanted to point out this as well. And also, you know, we completely, I mean, from our perspective, it's completely not understandable why, you know, at the same time, European Commission is proposing a separate MSR that will be price reactive, and agree to keep the system which doesn't respond to the prices in other systems, where we can observe this huge volatility of prices and of the market. So these are two remarks that I wanted to share with you.
Okay, well, I don't want to press people. Let's go to Alex Luta. Alex, you have the floor. You want to introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me fine. I have been following the EU ETS since 2014, and I'm currently at A3 Management Consulting as decarbonization expert. My questions are to Hans Bergman. There are two, and I'll keep them very brief. One is to look at the edge effects of this of the enhanced LRF. We now understand that the cap is going to hit zero in the 2040s, and the question is around people who are not going to be decarbonized by then. Do they have, like aviation or process emissions from industry, are these people expected to keep on buying up allowances and use them in perpetuity until, like, say 2100 or something like that? Or are we linking up with some pillar on negative emissions or offsets or some equivalent like that? That's question one. Question two is on the design of the two MSRs. So they seem to be a little bit out of sync with each other, with very robust assumptions on carbon price in the business and transport one, but no tapering, for instance, in buildings and transport. So can you explain why they're not more harmonized in their design? Thank you very much. That's it.
Thanks, Alex. Well, let me take one more from Leon de Graaf, whom I will promote to panelist. Leon, I think that you eventually will, I'm not sure why it's taking time. Now we should get there. There's always a short delay between these two. And again, I encourage everybody to react, because I think that some of these questions there's a lot of questions, but there's not a lot of answers. And at this point, this will continue. Leon.
Thank you very much, Andre, also for organizing the event. Also, thanks a lot to the European Commission for the very impressive package. My questions is specifically on the EU ETS product benchmarks. So maybe just to start off, I work for Sustainable Public Affairs. We work for sustainable fund runners, and several of them actually applaud the accelerated phase out of free allowances from the system. So we saw that I saw that the European Commission and Mr. Bergman already alluded to it, wants to make the benchmarks more technology neutral and ensure equal treatment of installations independent of the technology or production process used, which is very good news, because there are several examples where sustainable fund runners that are under the ETS are hardly benefiting from these free allowances, while their dirtier competitors do receive free allowances. Where this will take place, basically this revision of the scope of the benchmarks, I guess it's under this Annex 1 from delegated regulation from 2019. So my first question would be, what is the timeline for revising this delegated regulation? And second of all, you mentioned, Mr. Bergman, the example of basically gray versus green hydrogen. You know, that's a clear example where the current benchmark system isn't rewarding the green hydrogen producers. That's clear. But there are also several examples of how breakthrough technologies, for instance, in the iron ore production, or even in other sectors, they end up falling in the fallback benchmark right now, while there are competitors that have dirtier technologies, but basically eventually produce the same thing. They have their separate benchmark and they only have themselves to worry about. But that shouldn't be the case. It shouldn't really matter how you produce something. It should matter how clean it is produced eventually. So therefore, you should put all of these competitors in the same benchmark. So my second question is, will the benchmark scope revision also help level the playing field for those cases? Thank you very much.
Yeah, Jacob, you raised your hand.
Yes, I raised my hand, but I think I would like to have Hans maybe answer this first, if you don't mind.
Okay, well, Hans, would you want to react to some of the things that were raised?
Yes, of course.
Well, it was predictable. I'm sorry, Hans, but you know that it's I mean, everything you always wanted to know about ETS review and more. So to the point that you can answer and you cannot answer everything, I realize that.
Yes, so no, but it's true that thank you first of all for all the questions, all the interest and the big number of participants, etc. So this was a big teamwork. Many people were involved, and also many people were involved at a high level in at late, etc. So, you know, sometimes it's a bit difficult for me to sit here and reply on the details and explanation for every single part of the package. And even if of course on the ETS, well, maybe we talk about not the whole package, but ETS, even ETS as such was many discussions. So I can say that this is the overall assessment of the European Commission, how one should go forward with ETS as part of the overall broader picture. So, but to underline, I mean, some of you say, how will it be? And I have to underline, this is a proposal. I think you all know that this goes to now to Council and Parliament, and they're the ones who decide how it will look like in the end. But doesn't mean that we should not, of course, explain why we have proposed what we have proposed and why not sometimes. Now, I think one can always see things from different angles, and sometimes somebody can see this is not logical if you compare to that, or something is missing or something is there which shouldn't be there. And I think we will certainly see some modifications in different directions when we get into this more detailed negotiations with the legislators. But what I can try to perhaps react a little bit to one thing, okay, what I forgot to say, which doesn't mean that it's not important, but it just so happened is the increase of the Modernization Fund, but which is also an important part of the package. I know that Wanda says it's not enough, but anyway, it's an increase of 60 to 80% compare how you calculate it. So we're perfectly aware that there is a big transition issue in the countries with sort of lower average revenues, who are the beneficiaries of this fund. But what I thought perhaps to say one thing on is on this, why didn't we address speculation, etc. So we have followed the market very closely. We always do, and even more now lately when it went up. And we have been in quite a lot of contacts with market participants at both, and notably also compliance buyers, etc. And try to understand what's going on with the market, and is this price increase sort of speculation, or is it can it be explained by how the market sees ETS in its policy context? And it seems to be that most analysts see the link between the policy and the price, and not that there is some sort of financial speculators who have driven up the price to the level we have now. Then that can be short-term variations perhaps, but there is the share of what we call financials that are not there to help the compliance buyers with the hedging, etc., is relatively small. And the market is now really very, very large, and it's therefore also quite difficult to make a big impact on it. In the short term, you can always try, but we have seen that it's relatively stable now since a couple of months on a new level, which is possibly linked to this Fit for 55 package, and that everybody now believes that this will really come. But we will, this market oversight is an important element. We keep it very closely, and work closely with the colleagues in FISMA and financial markets, and also national financial markets and regulators, etc. Now, rebasing, and also was concerned about that. It's, when you see that every year the cap is way above the emissions, I think the question comes up quite naturally. And to some extent, it would also create more predictability, because the role of the MSR would be smaller with the rebasing, and that's also makes it, as somebody mentioned, perhaps more predictability, as I said. So that's how we see it. And if you don't do this, you would have to have a higher link reduction factor, and that can also have impacts post 2030. Now we haven't made a proposal of post 2030, with the exception of well, ETS continues post 2030 now if we don't touch it. So that's one thing, the cap and the linear reduction factor. And without rebasing, the annual reduction is higher, and post 2030 reduction is quicker. So it's also a bit of a balance. What is the right way post 2030? But that will certainly come more later. That's also, if I jump to, I think Alex's question about post 2040 and 2075 and all of that. I think we are not really at that. We are, of course, climate neutrality 2050, but how exactly to handle ETS and other in that longer term perspective, I think it has to come back. But it's an element that is, of course, relevant to think about. If I just go to Jakob on competitiveness, maybe I didn't mention the word, but it is an extremely important part of the Green Deal, and it's constantly underlined the importance of industry and competitiveness. Now, I understand also that if you emit a lot of CO2, use a lot of fossil fuel, it's a challenge, and okay, the Innovation Fund is there to help. The carbon, the CBAM is there. I know there's an export issue, and I am not an expert in exactly that part, but I think there will be more discussions about this whole industrial competitiveness, and I think industry is quite good at making their voice heard, and in various ways. I'm sure there will be more discussions how to handle this whole transition in a way that the industry is with and continues. We have a lot of new sectors and products created, and also the one you mentioned, maybe you have a big role in this more hydrogen economy. So there is certainly lots of changes and adaptation to it happening. There was a question about how to, sorry, with the potential increase of new benchmarks, or new how to handle this new steel and new hydrogen. So it's a two-step proposal. So in step one, to add to make the definition of products a bit less specific in the ETS proposal, and then in the second step propose to review the benchmarks and the installation boundaries, etc., for the period 26 to 30. So somebody asked, when will this start? Well, we can, the thinking has already started. There's a lot of information we have, and we can, of course, start preparing the work, but we can't, of course, not do anything before there is legislation in place that agrees that we should go in this direction. It was interesting, and I think what Mr. Rissa Beck said about district heating, I think you also try to make that point sometimes, that or several times, that a not insignificant part of building heating is covered by the existing ETS in the terms of district heating plants. So, and also all those who heat homes with electricity is covered by ETS. So to broaden it, at least in this home sector, is indeed quite strongly linked to consistency across the board. And when it comes to separate prices, well, as you know, there's been a very much discussion about this proposal, and not least the social aspect. So ETS, as we know it, is now 15 years old or more, and this was seen. This is a new system, and therefore it was deemed more started a bit differently. But I agree with you that I think you're a chief economist, if I understood that most economists would like to have one carbon price across the whole economy and across the whole world, etc. And I agree that that is the right sort of aim, but sometimes perfection is not always possible, and we have to start with what we can. So It's probably, and that's also why there are some more provisions in this new proposed ETS on price management, etc. Well, it's not price management, well, in a certain way, price management, at least to be a bit more possible to react quickly because of the social aspects and the general concern. On the maritime, I think when Stefano replied, maybe you meant maritime, but all you talked about aviation, or because you, or because, okay, we would add maritime. It's not a very big sector in the context of ETS, but of course that would only be done. First of all, I should say with maritime, there is a phase-in period, so 4 years where emissions only have to be, only part of the emissions have to be reported year by year. So we have to make sure that these things function in synchronization. And that's also the same thing for if there would be rebasing 1 year, one has to look how ETS, the MSR and the auction and all of that impacts on those exactly those years. And that, I think we will have to come back to that in detail, the primary or secondary legislation, once this is this would be possibly agreed, because of course we should not have too much variation in auctioning, and in general the market stability for us is very important. I'm not quite sure I understand why rebasing is retroactive, to be honest, by Vanda, but because it's not, as far as I can see it. It's true we calculate it with a backward from a backward way, but it doesn't start from, it doesn't remove anything from the past. E-fuels, yeah, that's an interesting element. We will work more on that. This fuel that is used based with let's say recuperated carbon. I think we have to. There's a concern that the fossil carbon would escape any regulation, but it's also not the intention to have it double sort of covered. So we have to. That is part of the elements looking at. And also on this contract, carbon contract for difference is also a way to support industry with the Innovation Fund, which is proposed to come. Yeah, Magnus, do we need MSR after the cancellation? Well, the cancellation is about the reserve, but MSR is about the surplus, so it's not exactly the same thing. So I think, and so MSR might still be needed to handle the surplus that is out there in the market, still owned by. And then we have to also not forget the MSR, as we know it so far, it has removed the allowances from auction, but there is also a lower threshold, and if we go under that, MSR will add allowances to the market. So I think we should, for that reason, keep it. I think I covered most questions more or less, maybe not in to full satisfaction to everyone, but at least as far as I possibly can.
It's a first cut. Let me go. Thanks, Hans. Thank you. Let me go to Jacob, and then I have three more people that will get the floor very quickly. But Jacob first.
Yeah, thank you very much, Andre. I would like to take the opportunity of having two power sector people on the panel here, Van der Boek and Pavel Resebeck, and ask you the following. We know that the future is going to be about electrification. We will have to produce green ammonia from green energy. And the question is whether this ETS proposal will help you in the power sector to deliver more green energy to industry, and not just industry, but at the site where we need it. You know, I don't need green energy maybe in the North Sea when I need it in Kędzierzyn in Poland, or if I need it in Dobrotice in the Czech Republic. So the question to you is, will this ETS system help you to grow green energy and to deliver it to the factory or the plant door? So this is my question just to understand how you think about this ETS proposal in this context of greening our economy. And the second thing, to Mr. Bergman, thank you very much for mentioning competitiveness. I know you probably, it is in the text, but I still think we have a real issue with competitiveness. And I do think that we need, or I would ask that everyone thinks more about how to, what is good, the interaction between free allowances and competitiveness, and also expert competitiveness, because it is a key issue. I heard what Leon de Graaf say, we should just do away with free allowances, but that's very easy to say if you have no responsibility for the industry behind. I can say we produce about sort of just short of 50% of all hydrogen at the moment in the fertilizer industry in Europe. We use it ourselves. And I can tell you, for us, it is a huge problem. And how to do the transition to base our production on green energy is a huge issue. And free allowances must be part of the solution. So I will stop there, Andre, and just ask whether there's any comments from my two panel colleagues on, will this help developing green energy at the factory gates where we need it?
Okay, the electricians will be up to that. They get a little bit of time to think about it. But I'll go that if quick intervention for Bill, Thompson, Bartek, Czuczewski, and then Theo Genda. So Bill, let's try and keep it short.
I'm the co-chair of the UK Emission Trading Group. I've been following emission trading since its first drafts in 2002, so a long history there. Hans mentioned in his introduction that the installations covered by energy audit under the Energy Efficiency Directive will be required to implement the audit report or demonstrate equivalence. Or if they don't do either of those, their free allocation will be reduced. So the question here is, what is the point of this new element of the ETS? What is it trying to resolve? Is it too much free allocation or something else? From my perspective, the proposal actually breaches quite an important consideration, and that is the flexibility element of the ETS. I mean, firstly, free allocation is already subject to new benchmarking values. Secondly, the allocation subject to the ETD, as I said, it does give this flexibility issue. When an operator decides whether to implement a reduction, the investments are not usually linear. You build a new plant every couple of years or every several years. But of course, if you have an energy audit, it's likely to be a linear. So you may find yourself having a reduction in free allocation because it's not worth for a couple of years actually implementing a new installation. The energy audits themselves are highly subjective, and they're nationally or regionally administered, and they're not necessarily harmonized across EU installations. So you've got a risk of competitive effects here between installations and countries. And finally, a bit of an issue here with about over-regulation. If the concern is too much free allocation, then surely you've already got a new mechanism. This is the annual adjustment mechanism by which free allocation is amended with reported activity levels, the plus minus 15% thresholds. So I'm interested to know why this new thing is required. And bearing in mind that you're going to have to push very hard to get this thing through council, etc., this seems to be an area of over-regulation that can perhaps be ignored. So far, it's not been required. And in fact, very specifically at the beginning of the ETS, the intervention or the mixing of energy efficiency and installations was specifically ruled out in one of the articles. Anyway, one for you and perhaps for other of the industry members of the panel to think about.
Okay, thanks, Bartek. Let's try and keep it quick because I think the electricians need to answer, and maybe if Hans wants to jump in at the end or not.
Yes,
Bartek.
Yes, sure. Thanks, Andre, for organizing this and giving me the floor. My name is Bartek Szczerski. I'm representing Business and Science Poland, which is a multi-sectoral organization, but having a strong industrial component. And I'm taking the floor because I wanted to concur with Mr. Hansen and also take benefit from presence of Mr. Bergman here, and to link actually two issues that were raised here, namely competitiveness, which in our view has direct impact on our climate policies, because if we lose international markets, this actually constitutes carbon leakage as well, because we'll lose markets higher emitting competitors. And as we all know, free allowances so far have provided some solutions in here, and we're afraid that without a solution on this aspect, we'll simply face the old economic truth that bad money drives out good money. So in other words, high emitting competitors will drive out low emitting companies from the EU. And in this context, it's striking for me to see that actually the Commission sees the possibility for coexistence of CBAM and free allocations for a long period in a WTO compatible manner by subtracting free allowances from the number of certifications required for importers in a given sector. So it seems that actually the withdrawal of free allocations for CBAM sectors is rather a political decision, not a legal requirement. So I'll be very grateful to hear a comment from Mr. Bergman or potentially other panelists about this as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Bartek. Theo Genda, but Theo, very quickly, please.
Sorry.
Okay.
Did you ask me? Sorry, because I'm losing the connection.
Well, I have Theo Genda.
Oh.
Sorry, just give us a second, but if it's not reacting, then I will go and give the electricians the floor.
No question, please.
All right, fine. Then what I will do is I will go Ubanda and Pavel Rezabek, the electricians, were being asked a question. As a former electrician, I'm anxiously listening. Pavel, you want to start?
Yes. Okay. Thank you. If this directive will help to decarbonize and to go more into electrification, definitely yes. We have actually an anecdotal evidence internal. We as a company have spent several months, like half a year, to prepare an emphasized green strategy called Vision 2030. We came to a proposal to significantly decrease the coal production, and especially for the local Czech environment, it would be a huge progress. And due to these different leaks, we could observe firm prices of CO2. So when we came with this new emphasized strategy, it was somehow not so unique as we had expected previously, but definitely it at least confirmed that we are on the right way. And second point, this Modernization Fund will be pretty important in the Czech Republic, because due to some historical reasons, when the politicians made really a mistake, they created some excessive system providing huge subsidies for photovoltaics. It became too expensive. And simply, even today, when photovoltaics is the least cost new electricity you can have, this is somehow unpopular in our country. And for any politician, it is difficult to come with the idea that we should, as consumers, we should support new renewables. And this Modernization Fund gives a good opportunity really to start with some new attitude. It will not be paid by consumers, so by end consumers. So it means that they somehow accept it, and it will be based on it will be general investment support what will provide. So this is kind of a market-based instrument. You have to calculate with future power prices. You have to make some estimates, so you have to take some risk, and it is relatively close to what how normal market works. So this will start based on Modernization Fund, and actually, at least our company would like to have like 6 gigs of photovoltaic in 2030, what should cover about 10% of the Czech consumption. So that is clear progress.
Wanda, very quickly from you.
Well, to answer this question, with full responsibility, we need to analyze it. We need to analyze it deeply. But there were also any other question, any other remarks and answer that if I may just use this time. And my question to Hans is, I don't know whether I understand you correctly, but you said that from your perspective, there are two paths, two opportunities. Either the MSR, the MSR and the higher LRF will be combined. Either there will be even higher LRF. So these are the only opportunities that then you can see. And to be honest, I completely don't understand why, because prices of CO2 are already extremely high. They are enough to force countries, to force investors to the transition. Companies like PG are already on our path, on very ambitious path to green transition. So what is the purpose? What is the purpose of this kind of flogging a dead horse? Because of course you said that there will be an increase of Modernization Fund, and we recognize this as well, but it's not enough. It's not enough still, and these are facts, these are numbers and we cannot say that we don't see them. It's not opinion. It's not about our opinions. It's about covering investments with money, and somehow we have to cover these investments. So probably this will be the cost passed into final customers. So these are my final questions, and just ask for clarification. What is the purpose to make this market more and more demanding in the future, even though it's really enough right now, and it's really very difficult for a coal-reliant country and energy companies to cope with the situation that they face nowadays.
Andrei, can I reply 2 minutes? I have to leave because in fact I have something else at 12, which I realized.
Okay, go ahead, Hans. Thank you very much. Can you react to what you can react, please?
Yeah, to build on the conditionality, I would just say that the value of the free allocation handed out every year is quite enormous. I don't have it in my head, but it's in the tens of billions of euro, and to do that without it's very often, as you heard, seen as money for nothing and by some, and we don't see it like that. But at least to give to put some little request on part of this money for us seem to be opportune, and to do it not in a complicated way. It's just a one-off check before next round of free allocation starts that it has been done. I understand from the Polish colleague that yeah, of course, there is a risk of carbon leakage. That's why we have the free allocation. We have also the CBAM proposal now. There is we see that there is a possibility of an overlap, but phasing in, phasing out. So not one thing on top of the other, but kind of phasing in. So not to keep having more than 100% what we have today. So that's basically the. And then I think on Wanda, I think we have a goal for 2030 that we need to reach, and it's just if you have a starting point and an end point, you can go steep down, or you can make a step down, and then you can go a little bit less steep down. That is a part of our impact assessment, and I think it's not a matter of try to make it harder. It becomes more tight, but we are already at the 43% that we had hoped for 2030. So the additional effort now to be asked from ETS is sort of seen to be part of the cost-effective path to reach the overall EU targets. That's not me how I decided. That's way above my head. That we have to reach the target, and ETS has to contribute. So, but I'm really sorry I have to leave because I think they're waiting for me now. There's some event somewhere. But thank you very much.
It's another crowd that's going to ask you the same question, Hans. Good luck.
Okay, thanks.
Well, listen, thank you all very much. Jacob, you had your hands up. Apologies, the dynamic is such. There was something else you wanted to add, please.
No, I sort of just want to answer Bill Thompson's question about the energy efficiency review and the conditionality on the free allowances benchmarks. And we were also surprised when we saw this bill in the new text. So we looked at it and we discussed it a bit internally, and many of our members, they do anyway energy efficiency reviews. So at the moment, it's a little bit too early for us to say whether this actually changes anything in what is already being done or whether there's a new effect of this. So the final verdict is outstanding for me. This is what I wanted to say to you. But of course, we paid it, I agree with you. It sounded, or it looked very, it looked like a big major new element when I first read it. But then it turns out that many of our members do energy efficiency reviews anyway. So we need to see what is the real effect.
Okay. Anyone else? Final comments? It's at the end of a long year and the beginning of a short summer. So I think people are somewhat exhausted maybe on these things.
Andre, just a quick reply to Jacob Hansen. Yes, every installation will be looking at energy efficiency. The question is whether your regulator tells you to do it out of line with your normal investment process. That's the question. So it comes as no surprise that installations in your industry are undergoing energy efficiency checks and reviews. Absolutely, it's free money, if you like. The question you've got is that if you have to pay for a change to be made, whether that's going to be inside your investment cycle. And it might be outside the investment cycle because many installations go for a 4 or 5 year turnaround period. To close your plant down inside that is actually hugely expensive. Now, in terms of the regulator, they may be looking, saying, well, there's an energy efficiency issue here that's been unaddressed. Do it now. That could be hugely disruptive. So it's a case of making sure you've got that flexibility. My point was that the issue of free allocation is already covered. There is now a change that takes place under the plus minus 15%. You've re-updated the benchmarks very carefully. So why go for this extra sort of belts and braces? From an administrative perspective, I can see how the Commission wanted to join up thinking here, but just don't go there. It's a bridge too far. The ETS is supposed to be a mechanism which gives installations the flexibility. Don't go down the route of making it an administrative adjunct, if you like.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, it's like a nuclear plant, defense in depth. Emily, any last thoughts? I don't want to force people again. We're over time and maybe people are sick and tired, but you all have joined today. So anything from your side, Pavel? I think Wanda had to go too.
No specific elements. It's just the beginning of the debate, I would say. But we continue to discuss about all that during 1 or 2 years.
The long hot summer.
Yeah.
Pavel, anything from your side? Last thoughts?
I think everything I wanted to say was said. Thank you.
Everything was said. Okay. And Stefano, thank you very much. Anything from your side?
Well, I think it was an interesting debate, and I also think that this proposal is a starting point. More interesting things will happen.
Well, we live in interesting times anyway. So anyway, thank you very much to all of you. We hope to see some of you this afternoon. And with this, I wish you a nice summer for those of you who will take some summer. I certainly intend to do so. So anyway, I thank you all, and we shall see you not in very long time, unfortunately. See you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre. Thank you all. Bye.
Bye-bye.